guys, we are going live.
Great.
All right, perfect. So we can go ahead. Next slide, please. So, like Nicole mentioned, we would like to acknowledge, and this is very important to us, we would like to acknowledge that we are broadcasting this webinar from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam nations. Next slide, please. So in this webinar, what are we covering? We will introduce you very briefly to our conservation area. We will provide some details of just very superficially some of the history of our conservation area as well. And then we will speak broadly about the human impacts on wildlife, and then Marissa will talk to you about how we control those impacts on Maplewood Flats Conservation Area, and then we will have some time for questions and answers. So just keep your questions ready, and we will have time to discuss those. Next slide, please. So Maplewood Flats Conservation Area is located in the district of North Vancouver. That's specifically on the north shore of Burrard Inlet. This is at about 30 hectares property of covered by second growth forest. Also, like around 90 hectares of mudflats, and it's traditional. The traditional use is it's been used by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, who have been the stewards of the land, and they use the marine resources and collected seashells, and also use waterfowl and harvested some of the berries. Tradition, and in the last 100 years, the whole region has gone through a really intense process of urbanization and industrialization, especially. And specifically here at the Mudflats Conservation Area, or what it was back in the day, it started like in the 1920s, where there were several industrial operations going on. It started with gravel quarry, and that's when the barge channel was stretched. And then in between the 1950s and 70s, there were like several other industrial users, from car wash and I don't know, like car mechanics or whatnot, and to like the 1970s, where the site was used as a storage for logs, and the whole region was developed intensely for industrial purposes. And this is right now, currently, this is a nature oasis and a matrix of industry and factories and whatnot. So more recently, in the 1990s, specifically 1993, the conservation area was established, and this is because of a really big push, a great effort by some of the local residents and bird watchers, naturalists, and scientists who saw the beauty and the ecological and biological importance of this region. And it was established as a way to protect and conserve wildlife in general, and specifically birds. So far, we have documented roughly 250 bird species, and around 55 of them are resident species. I think it is also important to say that the land is owned by the Vancouver Fraser Ports Authority and the district of North Vancouver. We go to the next slide, please. So what are the ways that we humans impact have an impact on wildlife? One is habitat loss. There's a big one, and this is actually the single biggest threat to wildlife worldwide. And it's estimated 80% of documented species are threatened by this. This is the biggest threat to them, like habitat loss. And the biggest driver of habitat loss is the agricultural expansion, especially in developing countries, and even here in developing countries, has been the same story all over. But in coastal areas specifically, it's called coastal areas, just like the Metro Vancouver area. There has been urbanization, industrialization, and also an increase in the tourism activity that is putting a lot of pressure on coastal ecosystems. There was a study from 1994, I believe, that says like nearly 40% of the global population lives in coastal areas, and that was 1994. It's like 20 years ago. So that number has increased significantly, and I'm sure in the future it's going to be even more pressure on coastal ecosystems. So the next impact on wildlife is habitat degradation. What is habitat degradation? This is the conversion of high quality habitat to poor quality habitat. You can think of like how pristine coastal rainforest was here and like around this Vancouver area, or even here the mud flats, and what it is now. At least here in our conservation area, we have second growth forest and understory of blackberry. That's that's a form of habitat degradation. It's not pristine. It's a different form. It has an ecological function, but it is not optimal. And then the next one is pollution. Pollution is the introduction of some contaminants into the environment, and this can have negative effects on the environment, on species. And pollution can be chemical. It's not just the chemical substances, but also can be different forms of energy, like light or heat or noise. Those are forms of pollution. And given the industrial path of the Maplewood plants, it is very possible to find pieces of evidence of pollution, and you can just dig around and you will see some pieces of concrete or asphalt. This site also was used as a landfill where the Vancouver residents used to dump, like dispose all their construction debris, and the garden soil were all disposed in this area. You can find that, and also we have significant levels of copper in our wetlands. We're not sure where that is coming from, but we are seriously investigating and monitoring that particular evidence of pollution. And then the next one is behavior. And this is we as humans interfere in the behavior, or we can modify the behavior of many animal species. And we have to keep in mind that these species play an important role in complex ecological processes. So when they can carry nutrients, they're food for some other species, but they also transport diseases and whatnot. And those are really complex relationships that we are altering. And some of these species, like for example, keystones, what's called keystone species, then when you remove it, you can alter, like it starts a cascading effect, modifying other population or other species, and ultimately modifying entirely an an ecosystem. So all this is caused by interfering with their wild behavior. So next, Marissa will talk about how we control or manage those impacts on the wildlife at Maplewood Flats.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you for that really good introduction. And I just wanted to start with this slide. It has a really good kind of series of photos here that I really like. And these are all photos taken of wildlife at Maplewood Flats. So it really showcases the type of biodiversity that this site supports. So, and how our behaviors, our human activities can affect these species that are very real and exist on site. So the first thing we want to talk about right now is jogging. And jogging, of course, a louder, more intense form of walking. And it actually causes escape responses in wildlife and birds at a greater distance when compared to walking. There's actually an Australian study we found that found that 10 birds is studied in this study site fled faster or displayed more intense escape responses to joggers over walkers. So a lot of the guidelines we have on site are kind of really based on these quantitative measures and studies that have shown that these activities have a negative effect on wildlife or birds or the ecosystem. So for this reason, for jogging, we really discourage and we don't want jogging on site. Kind of a recurring theme be talking about through all these guidelines for on-site site use is that this is a site that is first and foremost set aside for birds and wildlife, for nature. This is a site that's kind of in between lots of industrial activities, commercial, businesses and residential areas. And this is one spot where we can observe nature and respect nature and let it be wild. And so I'll go up to the next one, which is bicycling. Of course, it has the same effect as jogging, except more intense. If you were to walk a mile or fly a mile in a bird's shoes, I don't know if that saying really works the same, but if you see a a big predator type creature rolling at you at I don't know how many kilometers an hour on a bicycle, it'll be quite alarming, I think. I mean, it's alarming to me if I were to see someone bicycling at me. So that really expends more energy for birds trying to escape from that activity. So for that reason, we also kind of don't want people to be bicycling on site, which is why we have a bike rack at the entrance, which we really encourage you to chain your bike to if you're biking here. And then you just can go for your leisurely walk to enjoy all the wildlife and the birds. And the next sort of guideline is really key when it's dogs. We all love dogs, and we don't really want to put blame on dogs because it's really an owner problem. Dogs can have a really big effect on the behavior of birds and wildlife. And there's actually a study from UBC. They conducted a study at Kitts Beach actually, which is has a leash mandatory rule at Kitts Beach. And during the study, they found that 57.8% of dogs during the study period were off leash. So at an off leash park, as over half of the dogs were off leash. I mean, on leash, we were off leash. So, you know, there's people just don't follow the rules, but and then it does cause problems. And there's an English study we found. I was looking at plovers, and they found the plovers were disturbed 80% of the time by off-leash dogs compared to only 12.9% of the time when only humans were near. So again, there's this really quantitative effect that dogs and especially off-leash dogs have on the behavior of these animals. And to kind of really emphasize this is there's another study from Australia that we looked over that found that dog walking in woodland ecosystems led to a 35% reduction in bird diversity and 41% reduction in abundance. And especially on the mudflats, we'll talk about the beach and mudflats in a second, but at our sites, there's no dogs allowed at all beyond the beach on the western portion of the site. No dogs at all, sorry. Dalmatian. However, on the left side, it's a bit more lenient. We do allow dogs, or sorry, on the right side, and to the east, we do allow dogs, but you're only allowed to have them on leash. So to kind of minimize that, that negative effects of alerting birds and disturbing them from, their natural behavior. Um, yeah, so we are working on signage, and these will likely not be the signs that get eventually, installed. But we do have signage is really a priority for us because a lot of these guidelines aren't, communicated well on site, and we're very well aware of that, which is why it's really an organizational priority for us to kind of, make this more better communicated to the public. And so going onto the beach and mud flats, of course, it's really attractive to go on beach walks and, go for a walk on the mud flats when the tide is out. But again, this is set aside as a conservation area, and we really want to, preserve these sensitive ecosystems for the nature and the wildlife. One study I wanted to mention from Malaysia at a mudflat site found that upon human disturbance, 36% of birds stopped feeding and flew away. 23% of the birds stopped feeding and ran away, and 22% stopped feeding and stayed alert, and only 19% continued feeding upon human disturbance. So this really kind of shows how even human disturbance, not even dogs would make these percentages even higher, as you can imagine, but when the birds especially have to, waste energy flying away from a disturbance or stop feeding and be on alert mode, that's them losing energy or not feeding and not gaining the energy they need for their reproductive, system and for fecundity. So a loss in energy and fat stores leads to a less productive, less fecund season for these birds. So our actions have direct results on, the reproductive success of the birds we want to continue to see on site. So it's just not a lot. We just don't see it. We don't see those effects. It's not physical change that we can see right away. And so another thing that we don't really see right away is like a lot of the foot traffic, or when you trample on mud flats and disturb those sensitive biological interactions, you're affecting the microalgae, the seagrasses, the biofilm that grows on the mud flats. And biofilm especially special mention, because biofilm has kind of been more studied and kind of just like more in common knowledge in the past 10 years. Some very important food source, high energy food source for migratory shorebirds that, come up north for the winter. Biofilm, just for your information, is kind of like this mucousy, slimy layer on top of the mud flats in some areas. That's kind of made up of, diatoms and bacteria and microalgae and that sort of thing. Delicious. So for these reasons, we really, really discourage people from walking on the beaches and the mud flats. Of course, when you come to Maplewood Flats on a busy day, you're always going to see people walking on the beaches and the mud flats. And like I said before, as a big part of this is a signage issue. But like even in December, I was walking along the trails, and this lady with a beautiful husky dog just unleashed the dog on the eastern side of near the mudflats, and looks like the dog was about to go jump into the mudflats and run around. And of course there are shorebirds out there on the flats, and what she said, we caught her to let her know that wasn't what good practice here, but she said that she had found a website online, like those local trails near Vancouver, and she found Maplewood Flats through this website and the website actually said that it was a dog-friendly site here. So it's really hard for us to kind of control that third-party information. That's not true. That's not accurate as well. So it's a lot of factors that we have to consider when people come visit the site and the public use and that sort of thing. Another big one that's really become a problem on site in the past few months, very noticeably, is people are visitors are coming on sites and feeding wildlife. It's not uncommon now, right? Recently to walk along the site, and sometimes you'll see just piles of seeds. Like over here at the top right, Alejandro took this photo, I think just yesterday. People just leaving little piles of seeds throughout, the trails, and we really discourage this because it causes extreme behavioral changes in these wild birds. It habituates them to people, and it's not what we want to happen at all in this, this conservation area where we want the birds to stay wild. Another issue with spreading bird seeds around is, it's another a way that can spread diseases more easily to a larger number of birds. If like there's salmonella in one bird eats some seeds, due to the flocking behavior to these piles of seeds, it can more easily spread to other individuals. I mean, it was in the news a few weeks ago where there was that outbreak of salmonella in the pine siskin populations locally. So we really want to discourage that, and we don't want to be a source of disease spread here either. So yeah, and malnutrition is a big one because not everybody knows what to feed the birds, even if when they do this. We don't want you to feed birds, and when people do feed birds, sometimes people still put out bread. One of the worst things you can do to feed birds. A few weeks ago, I was walking the trail, and instead of a pile of seeds, I saw a pile of like yellow candied like fruit that was just on a pile on one of the railings again, and it was just shocking that someone thought that was okay. It's hard for me to really wrap my head around it. But yeah, we're just trying to really discourage this human behavior of feeding birds on site. Another key point to talk about when we're talking about this issue is that the seeds that fall on the ground or get spread around really attracts like predators, nest predators, and rodents. So rats especially have been seen, snacking on the leftover seeds. And of course, they're really voracious nest predators. So we really want to avoid that too, especially going into the nesting season. So yeah, and you'll even see signs in other municipalities that will say something along the lines of "Don't feed the birds. What you're doing is littering," right? So this sign on the left is something we're looking to install ASAP. It was just designed the other week, and in response to all this influx of feeding that's been going on site, that no one really knows the reason why that started. But we, like the sign says, we want to respect the birds and respect their wildness, and because that's the whole point of the conservation area. And the next sort of guideline is, not touching or disturbing the wildlife. So this kind of ties in with the previous point of, not feeding the birds, because people have started to feed the birds from their hands, which has been really bad. Created some really bad behavior in the birds. They're really become much more habituated to people and associating humans with food. If you're walking along the trail and if you just stop in one spot, especially in some areas, even if you don't have any seeds, birds, especially like chickadees and nuthatches, will start to, flock around you and start looking at you from the branches above you. And this is the kind of behavior that didn't exist just like 3 months ago. This is very new behavior. So it just goes to show how fast we can alter the behavior of this wildlife. I was leading a volunteer walk the other day, and I was just pointing at something, and a chickadee almost landed on my finger. That's not what we want to encourage, right? And yeah, so that dramatic changes in behavior, and yeah, it's just really disrespectful to the wildness of these animals. And one of the last points for this presentation is not picking any flowers or berries. Like, these are resources that we want to keep for the birds and the animals. And like I said, first and foremost, again, this is a conservation area set aside for actually not only the fauna, but also the flora. So we want to keep that as, as undisturbed possible. And you really practice this saying of, leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but pictures sort of philosophy. And I'll kind of end it with, this is another guideline we have on site, relatively new, not so new anymore, unfortunately, but we really want to enforce that idea of making sure people are observing that 2-meter minimal physical distancing guideline, and travel trails in a clockwise direction. We have some, arrows, signs with arrows, big signs with arrows on them. So it's really hard to miss when you come on site for a nice walk. And it's less stressful that way and less bumping into folks. And the other thing is trying not to bunch up on the trail, especially on the weekends when it becomes very busy. We're a very busy site, and I think in the last year there was over 80,000 visitors. So this is these guidelines are something that we really need to observe, especially coming into the future, as every year we get more and more visitors. Yeah. And so I'm just going to conclude the presentation with a summary of what we learned during the presentation. So first and foremost, Maplewood Flats was established in 1993 as a sanctuary for wildlife and birds, not as a recreation area for people. Of course, there's value there for us as humans to observe and enjoy the wildlife, but in a calm, distance, walking, taking photographs, and not feeding like that sign. We learned that most human activity has an effect, or even a negative effect on birds and wildlife. And that to kind of negate some of those negative effects, we want to follow guidelines that we reviewed today on site at Maplewood Flats, to minimize these negative impacts on this sensitive habitat that's sandwiched between commercial, residential, and active heavy to light industry. So thank you for listening today, and we will be taking your questions now. If you have any, we'd love to, initiate a discussion, and I'll throw that to Nicole to start moderating. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my God, Marissa, that was amazing. Alejandro, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Maybe keep the presentation up because I really love the visuals on that. But yeah, I definitely wanted to, and at any point, if anyone wants to jump in, you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can write in the chat. So to find the chat, if you're in Zoom, you just kind of wiggle your mouse and you'll see at the bottom, kind of in the center, to the left of the green button that says share screen, you're going to see something that says chat. You just click on that and you type whatever you want to say, and it'll come up so we can read that. So feel free to do either one, but we're definitely down for you guys to jump in and unmute yourselves as well. Yeah, I just wanted to say I loved it. I also want to say that when you do feed birds and you leave the seeds on the ground, and then when it attracts mice and rats and stuff, a lot of times those rats and mice can also, be on the dying end, right? If they've been poisoned by rat poison or like rodenticide. And unfortunately, where my mom lives, a lot of people have rodenticide and they're using it, and those rodents then come down and they're dying, but they're still kind of living. And my mom has seen several birds of prey like owls, hawks, Cooper's hawks, things like that have eaten these rodents that are poisoned, and then they unfortunately die. And it's so sad to see that, just to see this animal that is just trying to feed itself. And unfortunately, because of our human interaction with wildlife, we've then negatively affected not only one animal, right, mice, but also then birds, and that's super sad.
And like you're totally right, and like having this attractant for these small mammals, it brings them to the site, and if they are they have ingested some kind of poison or toxin, that also attracts the raptors, like you said. So especially in an urban area like where we are, it's really hard to know what's been eating what. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
go,
sorry,
go
I
ahead.
was just, I was going to say, there's also a coastal area close to a port, and the presence of rats is it's pretty much widespread. They're everywhere, and there is also wild mice that we try to encourage on site, but because of the competition with rats, is really hard. Those white mice are like a part of the processes and the ecosystem that we want to restore. But yeah, the presence of fed feeds and external food sources increases the rat population, and that increases competition with wild mice.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
point. Good point.
good point. I just want to answer two questions in the chat. So, Mina, you asked, is there public transportation to the flats? And yes, there is. In fact, there's two different bus routes. So if you live anywhere west of the flats, you can catch either the 215, which is called the Indian River route, or you can catch the 212, which is the Deep Cove route. And they both leave from Phibbs Exchange. We are only a 15, maybe 20-minute walk from Phibbs Exchange, so it's definitely accessible if you can walk far distances. And as well, if you're on the other side or the east side, you can catch the same buses, the 215, 212, just in the opposite direction. So they'll probably say Phibbs Exchange or something like that. And so it drops you off right out front of the flats. The only downside is that we are on Dollarton Highway. So just be careful, because if you're crossing the road to go catch your bus, give yourself lots of time, because it's very busy and it's very hard to cross because of how busy it is. I mean, I'm just saying that from experience. So just to be aware of that. And then Derek Moore said, why does this area allow any dogs? I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's a question that's been brought up, I think, a few times. I've heard in my time here. I've only been here for like 6 months. um, I would say, I mean, it is in a residential area, and we want to kind of also serve the community. And lots of people do bring their dogs for that small loop walk. It's not a very big walk, I have to say, for the dog, but yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on that. And to be honest, this policy might change in the future, and that's more of a board decision for the Wild Bird Trust, for the board of directors. But yeah, it's a valid question, and I don't have an exact answer for you right now.
Yeah, I think it's hard, especially because to go through the bureaucracy of changing those rules, it can take a lot of time. And yeah, but I definitely think it's a good thing to bring up, right? And yeah, and there, like we said, these signs and other things are being implemented continuously to, we're slowly making that change just to create more awareness too, because I think a lot of people might just assume, right? Like most parks in Vancouver, you can bring your dog to. So I think probably most people just assume, and that's where that education comes from, right?
Yeah.
Hey, how do we share this with the public, right? Yeah.
And I think, what was I gonna say? So I think most people who actually come to the site with their dog, or like they know better, and they do follow this rule. And because most of the people who do come with their dogs, a lot of them are members of the organization already. And they want to do well on the site.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say, and I don't want to say like everyone who brings their dogs and are bad, because it's not true. It's just, that we would just want to make sure the dogs stay where they are right now, and they do follow the leash rule, for sure.
Yeah. I think
Yeah, and we want to provide. Sorry, just go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Alex. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, like, we want to provide a space for everyone's enjoyment, as long as they follow the rules and they do not disturb wildlife, which is our first priority. So we provide this small area for dogs, and I'm guessing to a lot of people, especially the new visitors, they assume, just like following Nicole's comments, that they assume that this is like any other city park. But this is a conservation area. It has like a different objectives, different goals, and different rules.
A raison d'être.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, and I think it was a really good point. I remember reading an article. It was based in the UK, and I think you might have even mentioned it during your thing, but about these birds when they're nesting, and how I guess the study followed like just humans disturbing these nesting birds, then dogs on leash, and then dogs off leash. And unfortunately, a lot of times when these birds were scared, they actually abandoned their nests. And it was leading to a decreased population, which is super scary because, we don't want, important birds like shoreline birds to be going, extinct or to be decreasing in population. And it was showing that like with humans, they would get disturbed still, but they would at least come back.
Yeah.
With on-leash dogs, they were disturbed. Some of them are like really spooked. It might take longer, but ultimately they were like kind of okay with it. And then with the off-leash dogs, unfortunately, it just was a huge, like the birds were not okay with it. And, rightly so, if you're tending to your nest, it's no.
Yeah, like I think that's a really typical like defensive move for, wildlife and birds especially because, if even if they stay to guard the nest and the egg survives, but the mother or dies, that reproductive potential won't exist the next year. So that's a really common strategy, I think, when facing these threats. And, I mean, to a certain extent, some species get habituated to human, presence. But yeah, that's exactly right. And, even like, it's more of an issue for sensitive species, like, for sure.
Yeah.
Ones that are at risk. Yeah, that's a good point.
Exactly. Yeah, no, definitely. So Jamie, this is a great point. So there's conservation areas that allow dogs like LSCR up the street. So it's confusing for people. The words bird sanctuary, I think, are more meaningful to people as far as recognizing the purpose of the space. Yeah, I definitely think language plays a part in how people perceive and understand. I also think that more importantly, signage too, and proper signage and also education like this event also can help us spread that word, right? And I'm super appreciative of these beautiful graphics that our graphic designer
Thank you, Honey
made for
May.
us. Yeah, Honey May, because they're fun, they're interactive, they kind of catch your eye, and that's what's really important is that in this ever evolving world, yes, language, education, but as well as something that's eye-catching and that's going to engage our viewers or the people that come to the flats, right? And I think that's really important.
I just want to make like a note too, like if this other conservation area up the street is allowing dogs to be in their conservation area, I don't know the quality of that. How much are we have to, after we're talking about all these disturbances that dogs cause, like how much of a sanctuary for wildlife is it there? And I wouldn't, in my opinion, like my personal opinion, I wouldn't, call that a true conservation area.
And JB said it's a lower Seymour conservation area.
Yeah, I think that would
be also, yeah, go ahead.
It'd be more accurate to call that like more of a recreational.
Yeah, we have to keep in mind too that our conservation area also has like heavily impacted vegetation. Like this is a second growth forest, and I think there's no reason for not providing like a small area for dogs and their human friends to walk around as long as they are on leash. Now, just going off leash anywhere, or especially in the mudflat, it's a big no-no. That's a big problem. And as long as people follow the rules and they understand that we, just as them, would like to protect and conserve wildlife for future generations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just want to make a note too, like Maplewood Flats is not that large. It's a pretty small conservation area. I'm not too familiar with the size of the Lower Seymour conservation area, but we're kind of we on our western, right on our border, we have huge industrial activity, and you can, when you're walking the trail, you'll hear it. It's very loud. So we have multiple stressors on site that are totally separate from dogs. So dogs just introduces a whole new stressor for the animals, and it's cumulative effects, right? So we want to keep that in mind too. We're a small site. We already have a lot of stressors to deal with. So yeah. Jamie says it's huge. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Marissa, if you would maybe go through the slides again, and I just want to see if anyone, it might help jog people's memory too. And again, if anyone has any questions, definitely write it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. To unmute yourself, it's the lower left hand. So if you have your Zoom open, you just go to the lower left hand of your screen, wiggle your mouse. That sometimes helps. Like go like this, and it'll say mute or unmute, and you can do that. But I definitely think sharing the slides too, because there's some things that I was thinking, I was like, I gotta say that, and I forgot. But yeah, they're beautiful slides too. But yeah, no, I think it's good to have these conversations, and it's good to talk and discuss this, because the more we can share, and then if you guys, the participants at home, go home or your home, go to your friends and share, share that information, it just helps, right? So
spread the word. The bird is the word.
The bird is the word. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if no one has anything, we could probably end it. Thank you everybody for, listening and taking an interest, because I think these are really important issues. Especially the feeding wildlife has been really a big issue at Maplewood Flats in the past few months. And we just really want to, we'll probably make a lot of more social media posts around the feeding the wildlife, because it's become such an issue. It's quite amazing how much the behavior of these birds have changed. Like I was like legitimately shocked.
Well, if you go to Granville Island, you can't eat there anymore. It's that bad. I wanted to maybe share one quick story.
Please do.
I used to go to Emily Carr University, which used to be on Granville Island. And as everyone knows, because so many tourists for so many years fed the seagulls there and still do, the seagulls are highly aggressive, to the point where like you can't even sit, like they swoop in on you. So my first day of class, it was second semester, I think. I was in my first year, and I was like, okay, first day of school, I'm feeling good. And there's a little small pizza place just off of the island, right? So I'm like, I'm gonna go walk there, get a slice of pizza, and I'm gonna go to my class. It'll be great, right? So I go to the pizza place, I get a slice of pizza, and I'm like walking outside. I'm gonna eat it on my way right to class. And I go to take a bite, and all of a sudden, what felt like a person shoving me hit me from behind, knocked me to my feet. I fell down fully, not just like a little oof, like I was red on the ground like that. I was like, what happened here? And behind me, it's a seagull. It's a seagull. He swooped down and pressed me with his little feet so hard and made me stumble, drop the slice of pizza. There's my lunch, right? And he swooped up and grabbed it. He knew what he was doing. He looked at me like, haha. Then I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna forget about it. I'm gonna go to class. I go to class. I realize he poop bombed me. He poop bombed me. My entire back, from shoulder to shoulder, from my neck down to my waist, covered in seagull poop. Covered.
And you know what? That's not the gull's fault. It's the people. That's terrifying.
Fault.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's terrifying.
If he had not been fed and trained to know that he could steal, yes, thank you, Jamie. Wow, I know. It was not a good start to my first day of school. If he had not been trained to steal food like that, right, to survive, he wouldn't have done that, right? So Why not laughing emoji? Yeah, that's the only correct reaction to this story. It was.
I had a friend. Yeah.
Sorry, I was
I
just gonna
had
say
a
it was
friend
funny. It was.
who had,
Oh yeah. Go ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead.
I had
Sorry.
a friend who had a very similar story. He was
Yeah.
doing a study semester in Scotland, and he had a hot dog, and a gull just swooped in and just ate the whole hot dog whole, like just like swallowed it down. A seagull,
Oh
a
my
gull.
God. Yeah, so you can
So
see that even if they're small birds, birds can become aggressive because that's their food source, and that's
mhm.
how they're trained to get food. Of course, if any of us were trained to get food like that and we saw that, we would also start to be aggressive, right? So
I mean, it
it
works.
is important, and hopefully no one else gets poop bombed at Granville Island. Definitely be careful
Yeah.
because it was not a good start to my first day of class.
Well, thank you for sharing that
Yeah, I thought that
traumatizing story.
was a funny story.
All
Yeah.
right.
All
We
right,
can end it
everyone.
here.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
I hope everyone has an amazing night. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to Marissa and Alejandro for their amazing. Yes, Mina. Woohoo. Heart. Love it.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for your
guys.
knowledge
Thank
Thank
and your
you,
you.
Nicole.
time. Bye, everyone. Bye, James.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Jamie.
Bye.
Bye. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Derek. Bye, Darlene. Let's see. I can't see who else is here. Bye, everyone who came. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Thank you. Oh, that went really great.
Yeah.